Well, hello. Welcome back to my channel. This is going to be episode 4 in Self-Pub Combos, Indie Combos, where I talk to interesting authors who have been very generous with their time. And today I have K.E Andrews. Hi, Katie.
Hi,
How you doing?
I'm doing well. It's summertime. Well, not summer. It feels like summer here, but not yet. So we're in the midst of our spring storms.
You're in Georgia, is that right?
hmm
Okay. What's it like over there in terms of the temperature?
it's fluctuating between like 80 evening times. It can drop down to 40 and 50, and then anywhere in between during the day. So you need a sweater in the morning and then shorts and by midday kind of weather.
How's your Celsius going? Because I'm married to an American and my numbers, my Fahrenheit numbers are egregious. Hot.
I used to be really good at it when I was in Scotland, and now I forgot. I think it's mm, maybe 20 degrees Celsius. I don't know.
Are
That's
you the
probably
same?
not right.
Are you the same as me, where you're living in a hot climate and you can't stand it whatsoever?
Oh, yeah, no, this is the great irony of living here is I die like 8 months out of the year. Not just because of the pollen, but the weather. I mean, it's hot. I like the winter. No one else does.
I walk out. So in Kuwait right now, it's just hit 40, and this is what April.
Mm,
So we're going to get to about July, and it reaches to 50 Celsius, which I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but I think it's
that's over
110.
100. That's way over 100.
It's like Phoenix, Arizona, something like that. It's
hmm
awful. So basically, we all stay inside and we get very grumpy with each other, and that's how our days go in the summer. But yeah,
Summer, yeah, summertime it gets like hot shower here, except for it's just gross.
yeah.
So,
And you know
hot
what?
and,
We chose to live where we're living, and I resent myself for it. Hey, can I ask you to introduce yourself, first of all? I'd quite like to hear. I've read two of your books. I've read one poetry collection and one novel, but I know you've got a wider collection of things out. So maybe the best thing to do is to let you kind of introduce yourself before we get into it.
yeah, so I'm K.E Andrews, or I go by Katie. I've been writing since I was in like middle school, but didn't get start publishing until I think about the pandemic. So good time to be publishing. So I started with poetry, but I've always wanted to do fantasy. So fantasy's been kind of like my heart genre. So start first book in a trilogy's out. I have a standalone. I've got a fantasy western novella. I've got some short stories and a devotional journal out. So yeah, I do that. When I'm not writing, I garden. I thrift a lot of stuff, and then I bake.
Lots of that comes up in Hills of Heather and Bone. Not so much thrifting, but the other stuff.
Yeah, no, the thrifting thing came much later. Like this year, I got back into it, and I was like, oh, I really like this. It's fun.
Was the fact you got started to publish your stuff during COVID, was that purely coincidental or something to do with the pandemic itself?
I think it was purely coincidental. It was just I had started with a nonprofit company, and they were focusing a lot on mental health and journaling.
Mhm.
So I took a lot of like my journals and poetry, and decided let's just publish that. So I started with them in 2019, and then 2020 I had stuff to actually publish. I had hoped to get published like before the pandemic, but that did not work out. So.
Hmm. I want to ask you about your poetry. Now, I'm going way off base already, but I read your collection of poetry this morning, one of them, Let the Hurt Girl Speak. And that's the
Mhm.
first thing that I wanted to, well, it's not the first thing, but we're going to jump to it anyway. We're going to move with the times because it seemed to me the word that was coming up in my mind is journal, a reflection, things like that. It seemed like those two were kind of very much intertwined in your work.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So yeah, that was like my I didn't like poetry before 2019 really. I had taken a college class on it, and that's when I finally was like, oh, now I get it. I understand it. So it just seemed to be like a natural fit for me of just like I'm more of an emotional writer. I like more of the purple prose. I like more of the vivid imagery. So I was like, let's do that. And then at that time, 2018 to about 2019 had just gone through some really rough stuff. So I was like, let's find something to do with our time. So that's kind of how most of those poetry works came about. And so I was just like, well, I don't know much about self-publishing, so let's just try it out with this, like get our toes in the water, see how to make a cover, format it, market it, design it. So that was really also my first introductory to self-publishing. So I learned a lot from that. But it was overall just more of a fun process for me.
But you didn't like poetry so much in high school.
No,
Okay.
didn't understand it, didn't care for it. I was like, I'm a fiction kind of person. I like the fantasy books, I like the novels. But then taking a poetry class in college was like, oh, that's what it is. Because it just, I don't think it was properly understood
Yeah.
in high school or taught to me correctly. So,
It's so tricky as a teacher because when I want to try and teach a poem to kids, I mean you can kind of approach it in two ways, right? You can approach it from the kind of almost like it's a puzzle box kind of a
mhm,
situation where you've got this thing, it's almost like a maths problem. You have to unpack it and annotate it and do that all the way down. Or you can kind of teach it as kind of an exercise in emotional catharsis.
mhm.
Just kind of seems to be where you were coming from.
Yeah. So I think it was both. The puzzle box analogy is quite good
Yeah.
because it is again is like how can I create an imagery with the words with the words and also get that emotional point across. So it's I don't like the rhyming. I'm not that good at the rhyming, limericks or sonnets or any of those. Those I was like that's maybe a little too structured. So the free verse haikus are about as structured as I get.
Mhm.
So just trying to figure out, how does this work? Like flow for certain things and sentence structure. How does it all play together to create like what I'm trying to convey? So that's where like the puzzling comes into it. Um, so it's always new. Each poem's so different and takes a little bit more work than the
How long
previous
does it
one.
how long does it take you to generally draft a poem? Because I know that some
Uh,
people rip them off in 5 minutes and some people it's months of ink up to the elbows.
It depends. So I'm working on like a poetry collection now that's a little bit more personal.
Okay.
So like the initial like idea of the poem, I might have like some of those lines and I'll put them down, and then sometimes later I'll go back and say, how can we fill this in? Does this make sense?
Mhm.
Where do we need to cut to make it like more concise and flow better? So sometimes some of them are really easy and I can just rattle them off and have the basic outline of it. But then going back through it and just saying, how do these all work together? Because it's for a collection, it's like each poem is individual. But if I'm wanting a theme, I need to figure out like, does it make sense to have this poem in the beginning? Does it play off of this other one?
Yes.
So there's a lot of like mental gymnastics that come after it. But sometimes with the initial writing, it can be fairly easy. It'll just depend on what the poem is. And I'm like, I don't know the rest of this poem, but I have like the heart of it.
Yes.
So trying to work around it can take a little bit longer.
Yeah, I used to try my hand at poetry in university, and they were all awful. I wrote them on napkins because I was working in a cafeteria at the time, and I wanted to
Mm,
keep a napkin by the end of it because it's just you can. I found from my perspective, like you could rattle off like an okay-ish first draft, but it's giving it that polish at the end that really kind of clinches a masterful poet from
mhm.
an amateur working in a coffee shop poet.
I
Getting
think all are
them.
valid. So that's the beauty of poetry is
Yeah.
it you don't have to be like Robert Burns, you don't have to be like Tennyson necessarily for it to be good. It's just does it connect with someone else and can they kind of envisioning what you're seeing? Um,
Yeah.
so
Is it scary or scary is the wrong word? What's the word I want to use here? Is it because obviously when you publish poetry, it feels a little bit more personal. Like you might spend less time on a poem than you will have a novel. But when you're
mhm.
publishing that, it's from the heart in the way necessarily maybe a story isn't necessarily in quite the same way. How do you feel about putting your poems out there into the world, especially given the fact they come from journaling experiences?
Yeah, so there is like the worry that people will misunderstand because
Yeah.
sometimes the poems are from events that have happened long ago as opposed to like currently. Because I've had some people who had read it and they're like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm a writer, so that answers the question of no." Um, but just having the confidence to say like, "Hey, this is just something I've written. Like, this is personal,
Yes.
and not everyone is going to understand it." So that's kind of like the first hurdle of like any sort of poem is like, "Hey, it's personal, but it doesn't necessarily mean like it's happening now."
Yes.
But I think that's also the timelessness of poems is like it can be, connected to any moment in time.
Mhm.
Um, Especially the personal ones. So some of like my favorite poetry books, like I know like the author's note will say like, oh, these happened years ago, but it's like, wow, this still feels fresh and real.
Yes.
So I think that's also like the beauty of it. But mostly it's just like, will people understand this or think I'm crazy? But at the end of the day, it's like I gotta I mean, poetry, I believe, is messy and beautiful at the same time.
Hmm.
So it's like, well, if you're wanting just a clean, polished poem, then I don't know what to tell you. Go
Yeah.
look at the nursery rhymes, I guess. Those ones are a little more polished because, I mean, I read Tennyson's like In Memoriam, and that thing is like 1,000 pages long.
One of the longest
um,
poems ever, right?
it is,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's pretty much just all about mourning. It's pretty, but it's like at the heart of it, it's like, oh, this is very sad.
Yeah. And you know that tradition of using poetry as emotional catharsis goes back
Hmm.
Lamentations. I think your poetry work actually comes out with an excerpt from Lamentations at the beginning. That idea of using
Yep.
poem to
Hmm.
display your grief is there from the beginning. Do you use alpha and beta readers for your poetry, or is that kind of more about the prose stuff?
Most of them I do use like my writers group just to say, hey, does this make sense? Does this seem to flow? So some of them who have a little bit of poetry background can offer some of that advice of like, hey, maybe this sentence structure doesn't quite work with the poem that you're going for. Um, but mostly I'm just concerned like, does this make sense and does this sound good?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, they're helpful. Some of I don't know. Well, this next one out, I probably will get some beta readers for it, and obviously an editor to look at it. So at least someone else will look at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, typically it's a smaller pool of beta readers, and like the questions are a little bit different.
Do you think? I'm trying to think of a good way to articulate this because I don't mean to peeve off any extroverts in the audience, but I often think that poetry is an extremely introverted act. I don't know about yourself. I would classify myself as an introvert. Although I can talk a million miles an hour and most of my YouTube comments tell me to slow down. The truth is, part of that comes from personally a wee bit of anxiety. And also,
Hmm.
um, when I turn the camera off, I need a bit of space to kind of unwind and relax by myself. I classify myself as introverted. And I think a lot of poets
Hmm.
do. I don't, there's not really a question here. I'm just wondering, like, poetry as an introvert's experience, does that gel with your kind of understanding and your own process?
Oh yeah, I would for sure classify myself as an introvert, but I've just had a lot of retail experience, so you have to be
Yeah.
an extrovert to do that. But yeah, I prefer like the downtime. I'm very introspective.
Yeah.
A lot of thoughts up there. So the poetry definitely was helpful of like, how long can we mull this over in my head before we have to get it out on the paper? So yeah, I don't know. It feels like a lot of poets are more introspective and introverted. But I've met a couple people who seemed very extroverted when they're reading their poems. So I'm like, I guess it depends on the person. But yeah, it's really hard to tell. But I feel like a lot of them are introverted for sure.
It's that thing of being able to take a moment and kind of explore yourself. But then it takes
Hmm.
the courage to put it out there, doesn't it? Before we
Hmm.
go, who are
Oh,
your
for sure.
favorite poets? You've mentioned Tennyson.
Mm. Tennyson, Gwendolyn Brooks. I really like her stuff.
Hmm.
Um, did Langston Hughes? No, I don't know. I was like, Langston Hughes, I don't remember if he's a novelist or if he's also a poet. I know he's an American writer.
Yeah.
Yeah, Robert Burns, I really liked his stuff. Gosh, Walt Whitman, I enjoyed his stuff. One of the Bronte sisters did some poetry. See, that's always the problem when they're like, "What's your favorite book? What's your favorite author?" I'm like,
Yeah.
let's go through the library and look. But yeah, Gwendolyn Brooks I really liked, and Robert Burns, obviously a classic. Um, and then yeah, there's a good number of ones I've read over the years that I was like, I really like this poem. I've been finding a lot of indie poems
Hmm.
and poets, so really starting to love their works. So yeah, as far as some of the classes go, I think that's the shorter list of what I know off the top of my head.
Just as you're speaking, what's kind of percolating in my head, what you said about 5 minutes ago about poetry being messy. And the more poets and the more poems that I enjoy that are coming up in my head are actually the ones that are a little bit, what's the word, untethered? Is untethered a good word for it?
Mm,
Like the
yeah.
poems that might use some structure, but at the same time do not feel beholden to the structure of the emotional resonance is more important. Yeah, so yeah,
Hmm.
I've got a million examples, but I won't bore you with them. Robert Burns is interesting. Did you do that? Did you enjoy Burns before or after you came to Scotland?
Before, yeah. So I knew about him before going, and then I was like, oh yeah, they Burns. This is Burns country here. I think we were actually there. for like his haggis poem at one point. Like someone
Okay.
was actually reading the poem and haggis was served and it was full kilt and bagpipes and everything. It was a really fun experience. And then the lady I stayed with, she had given me like a little plaid Robert Burns book that she had growing up. So I was like, oh, it's extra special. Um, so yeah.
So let's move on to that because I do want to speak about Hills of Heather and Bone. I've got about 15 questions loaded up on this computer on the side. But I want to take the back door, the Hills of Heather and Bone, because I know we've been chatting through our messages about your time in Scotland. We've talked about
Mhm.
that. And I thought a really interesting way to frame this conversation would be to talk about, if it's okay with yourself, your experience in Scotland and bring Hills of Heather and Bone in at the tail end there. Because you lived
Yeah.
in Scotland, is that right? What was that like?
I did an internship for 6 months.
Okay,
So actually, that's one of the stories I was going to mention because you said, "Oh, I've got stories." It's like I actually have a real fun story.
go on.
So I was supposed to go to Scotland for an internship in 2018,
Hmm.
and I was all prepped to go. I was ready to go. I was going to be working with a church organization there in Livingston,
Hmm.
and I was leaving in August. It was going to be 3 months, and they were like, "Well, you're going to fly through Heathrow. It'll be a little stricter." It's like, okay, cool. This is my first time flying internationally by myself.
Hmm.
So I was all ready to go. I get to border control in Heathrow, and they're like, "Oh, where's your work visa?" I was like, or they're like, "Why are you here?" I said, "Oh, for an internship." And like, "Where's your work visa?" I was like, "What work visa?" Because I didn't know. They didn't tell me that I needed that
Yep.
for, it was an unpaid internship. It was volunteer work. So that started a downhill of being pulled to the side, kind of like in the middle where you can't really leave, but people
Yep.
know something's up. So I was a mess at that point. Sat there for about 45 minutes. Then they moved me to the back room, which was fun.
Hmm.
So going through the whole thing of like, why are you here? And I'm like, so just trying to explain everything to them. Had all my phone and stuff taken. And then at that point, I told my parents what was happening. So it was about like a couple hours into this endeavor. So stayed in the back room of the airport, got talked with, interviewed, went through all my stuff. They were very nice. It was just a place I couldn't leave, and I was so tired. And I was like, I don't know what's happening. Um, so I stayed at the airport for 12 hours, and they're like, okay, well, you're not, we can't let you in, so we got to send you back, but we can't put you on a flight to Atlanta today. You can go to New York and find your own way home. And I'm like, no, we're gonna go back the way we came. So got moved to a detention facility, which was also an experience. It was
In
about
Heathrow.
1 a.m. Yeah,
Heathrow.
so Heathrow, they were like, oh, you could stay here, or you could go to the detainment facility where there's a shower. I was like, I want to
Yep.
go to
Yep.
where the shower is, an actual bed and not a chair that I have to sleep in. So was in a real scary van ride with this other girl who I really thought was going to murder me. She just had that dead-eyed stare. And of course, it's 1 a.m. and I can't see anything because the lights are on in the van, so you can't see outside. Get to the detainment facility, checkpoints and everything. I got interviewed. They're like, "Are you okay? Are you happy, healthy?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not happy." There was a sign that said, ways to decrease stress is don't worry. And I was like, this is not helpful in this situation.
That's
But
so funny. Way
yeah,
to
so that I
decrease
was
stress.
finally given a phone. So I had put my little SIM card in, was texting my parents. I'm like, hey, this is what's happening. Like, I'm gonna be on a plane tomorrow. Yay. So I go up to the second floor and they're like, hey, that girl you came in with, we're not gonna have you room with her. There's something wrong with her. Like, that's neat. We were in a van ride together. Um, so yeah, and then I stayed at the detainment facility. Next morning, got on another fun van ride back to Heathrow. I was escorted up to the plane because I was a flight risk, which is just standard for anyone who's been detained.
Yep.
And then I was sent home. So that was my fun 24 hours in England in the Heathrow airport. And it was just a real fun experience. I had like a little packet that had like a prison number at the top. I don't know why it said prison number because I'm like, we're not really in a prison. It's just a long term detainment facility. So they're like, well, it's not
Prison
going
is
to
just a
impact.
long-term detainment facility. That's a very funny one.
Yeah. hmm so they're like, well, it's not going to affect you coming back. Just apply
Yep.
for a visa and then do that. But of course, Brexit was happening,
Oh,
so
okay.
that was really great. So I had applied, gone through the visa process and everything, which is a whole lot of stuff. Thankfully, Atlanta has two British passport visa places. to go to. So I had done that, driven all the way down to Atlanta. They're like, hey, Brexit's happening. We're not accepting them. So you got to wait a whole other month. So I did that for all my fingerprints and stuff. And it was about May at this time. And they're like,
Hmm.
hey, you can go. So then that's when I went to Scotland, was in 2019 after my wonderful stay. And I was the reason that they made all the interns apply for visas. And that was always fun coming to a place and like, oh, I know you. You're the girl who got detained. I'm like, yep, yeah, that's a super fun story. So yeah, that was my first introduction. Heathrow, not my favorite place. Scotland, really nice.
Stansted is even worse than Heathrow, believe it or not. My wife and I have nightmare stories about going through Stansted Airport. Basically, in Scotland, we treat you better. I don't know if I can say that, but we treat you better in Scotland. Um,
It was nice.
yeah.
And then my second, well, the second attempt to go, and I got to Scotland and I had my visa, and the guy took my visa at border control, and he was gone for 15 minutes. So I'm having like a panic attack. I'm
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
please don't tell me this is an issue. And then it was fine. If I had just said tourism, it would have been okay because you can be there for 6 months just
Yeah.
saying tourism, apparently. So lesson learned, always have a visa for everything. So that was my introduction. But yeah, the rest of Scotland was great. Just meeting everyone. I stayed in a host home with this older lady. She was like in her 70s. Her last name was Ross. So then when I was telling her, oh yeah, Andrews, I think might be Scottish. I don't have any like known Scottish heritage. It's like Welsh and Sicilian and German.
Mhm.
She's like, oh yes, they're kind of closely related. So she's like, we could be cousins. I'm like, you're funny. I like you.
But
So it was great.
the thing about Scotland is that it's such a small country. The population is like 5 million or something. So, you joke about people knowing people, but the truth is it's actually, especially when you get into the kind of the subcultures of Scotland, like the Christian subculture of Scotland, everyone knows everyone.
Hmm.
And the capital city and Glasgow are about 40 minutes drive from each other. It is a
Oh
very
yeah.
peculiar place.
Oh yeah. And when people were like, "Oh, that's 40 minutes away. That's so long." I'm like, "Oh, that's just my daily drive to the grocery store." um, but yeah, it was really great just staying like in a small community, just getting to travel around. Like I said, went to Glasgow. I went all the way to Oban and then some other places in the Hebrides. Went up to Inverness, down to Dundee, and then back again to Edinburgh. I did like a Highlands kind of backpacking trip, which was fun,
Mm,
except for the time I missed the bus,
yeah.
and I had to hitchhike. So I was safe. I felt fine because I'm like, well, it's the Highlands, and most people are not. Someone's not going to murder me probably. So
There
I
are
played
some
it
spooky
safe.
people up that way.
There are some, but
Yeah.
I was told most of the time, like the Highland culture up there is a little bit more like, hey, we're not going to leave you on the side of the road, most
Yeah.
likely.
So
Um,
give me your rapid fire review of some of these places that you've been to before we move on to Hills of Heather and Bone. So Glasgow's where I'm
ooh,
from.
Glasgow was good. It was I loved like the architecture because it was so different than Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Very different culture vibe. I'd gotten lost in Glasgow, so I ended up doing like a 6 mile walk instead of a 2 mile walk, which was fine. Um, let's see. Oban was really nice. I didn't get to go to the distillery that was there, which was sad, but I did go to the Tobermory one. That was a lot of fun. I think the Cairngorms was fun. I did like a reindeer hike. That was really fun. Didn't even know about it until one of the girls in the hostel was like, "Oh yeah, I'm volunteering next door." I'm like, "Oh, that sounds fun." Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Edinburgh, so I mean, what's not to love about Edinburgh?
Yeah.
So I was there for the Fringe Festival. That was an
Okay.
experience. Yeah.
What's your experience with some of the cultural particulars of Scotland? There's Kaylee's mentioned in Hills of Heather and Bone, and Kaylee's
Kaylee's, yeah,
huge.
Kaylee's was fun. I went to it was for like a high school event they were doing, and I was volunteering, so I got to do a Kaylee, and I was not good at the dancing, but it was a lot of fun. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of what all we did. There was so much stuff. Um, Definitely the I wouldn't say coldness, but just like the usual normal guardedness of people as opposed to like here in the South, we're like, hey, how's it going? I
Yeah.
like your sweater. This is really fun. Like just being more open and upfront as what's expected of Americans.
Yeah.
And Scottish people, they can be like, that's a little weird.
Yeah.
So, getting used to that. Some of the words, like I watched a lot of Doctor Who and BBC as a child, so I was like, I know
Ah,
some
well
of these
done. Good.
words.
Yep.
Yeah, so I was like, I know some of these words, but the Scottish ones, I don't. That takes it a little bit little bit deeper. Because I had a friend who I met there. She's from Aberdeen, so she was telling me about the language of Aberdeen, Doric. And I was like, oh, that's way different than Gaelic, whichever one it's pronounced. I know there's two pronunciations depending on where you are.
Right.
So,
Peter Capaldi, David Tennant, Christopher Eccleston, Matt Smith.
hmm. David Tennant was honestly really my favorite. Just or something about it. Eccleston was the one that I grew up with first.
Hmm.
So David Tennant, Eccleston, Matt Smith, and then I've not watched since.
I mean, that's kind of the golden era, isn't it? I think you and I are kind of proximal in terms of our age, and we both. There's something about Doctor Who when it came out and that kind of that re-release. I was never familiar with it previously, but something about Doctor Who just hooked me. My friend showed me like that
Hmm.
random Slitheen episode. I think it was like episode 4 of season 1.
Mm.
This is one of the worst Doctor Who episodes ever made, but I was just entranced by the possibilities of this TV show that you can literally do anything with it. I think a lot of us have really just sort of it became quite close to our perceptions of what fiction can be because it was so endless.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Because it blended like that sci-fi and like a little bit of fantasy depending on which episode you landed on. So I really enjoyed it. But yeah, overall Scotland really good. That's why I've gone back several times, not been detained. Um, always try and fly out of Heathrow. That's
Mm.
always better when I'm leaving. But yeah, no, it was good. I The temperature was great except for that 1 week where it was actually really hot. um,
There's a what was I going to say? There's a thing about Kaylee's, and we'll move on to Hills and Heather and Bone after this. I think because my wife loves Kaylee's as well, and I really struggle with them because we're taught Kaylee's in school. You said it was a high school thing, right? And so the way that
mhm.
Kaylee's work when you're Scottish and growing up is when it gets too cold to do PE in the winter, they put you all in the games hall, the sports hall. This is torturous to an introverted 13-year-old David. Because what they did is they lined all the boys up, like 200 all the
Mhm.
way down the gym hall. They lined 200 girls all the way down. And then, the sadistic PE teacher just grabs a microphone, has a wee coy smile, and goes, okay, and now, boys, you need to walk across the room and choose your partner. And
Mm.
genuinely, the amount of trauma that is generated, I think, among a certain kind of student, 13, 14 years old in Scotland during those winter months is something quite exceptional.
I could see that because it was hard for me. I'm like, all right, I'm trying to just like learn this dance move, and now I gotta find someone
Yeah.
across from me and then keep track of it. So that was a lot of mental gymnastics. So I could see that as being very traumatizing if
Why
you
why
do not
Scotland
want to
in the
do that.
first place?
So there were a couple different internships offered to me when I was graduating. They were all like church organizations and people who knew like our director of operations.
Yeah.
So originally I was going to go to Spain because I'd gone to Spain a couple years prior to the Basque region.
Hmm.
And so that one I was like, oh, I'm really looking at that one. But they're like, oh, the person who would have gone with you dropped out and we really need two people to do this. So they're like, hey, how about Scotland? So I was like, okay, cool. I've never been there. Um, let's let's just do that. So it just seemed like a really like the doors were opening on that one, except
Yeah.
for when I was detained. But it all worked out anyway. So yeah, I just like I was like, oh, let's go see a new place.
I'm glad we treated you well. I'm glad you come back. It clearly wasn't
Of
often enough
course.
the Heathrow stuff that you come back now and again.
Oh yeah, that was England. That's different.
Have you been back to England?
No.
Yeah.
One of the trips we did go like out of Heathrow, and I was like, this is fine because we're leaving Heathrow. They just want me gone. It's okay. Um, but yeah, no, the food in Scotland's good. Company was good. Loved it.
So Hills of Heather and Bone, if we should move on to your work, because I'm aware we've just blathered about Scotland for half an hour, is very heavily inspired, shall we say, by the Scottish
Yes.
culture and Scottish landscape. It's not set in Scotland, it's set in
Mhm.
a fantasy world. But I guess my question for you is that how do you go about constructing a fantasy world that is so heavily rooted in the culture of an existing world?
So, I mean, it's quite a common thing for fantasy writers to do.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, it's like Asian inspired or like African inspired. Um, I my first book in my trilogy series is set in like a Moroccan inspired world. So I was like, I spent a lot of time in that world. I love that. But after going to Scotland, I was like, there's so much lore and history from the Celtic roots that are there. And of course, like the mysticism of the Highlands in literature and everything. It's like there's a lot to work with there. So it's like
Yeah.
that after being there, I was like, I can see why people believe that maybe there's kelpies up there, or any of the sea and any of those things. So I was like, there's a lot to work with there, and I originally hadn't planned on writing that book at all. I was
Mm,
supposed to write the second book in my trilogy,
mm,
and then I was scrolling on Instagram as one does, and I found like this photo someone had posted for an inspiration of their like work in progress, and like, oh, it's a necromancer couple on the run. I was like, oh, that seems cool. And then all the pieces started coming together. I was like, I'd been toying with the idea of a gender bent Hades and Persephone, where like Hades is like a big tall woman and Persephone is like a real short guy. And I was like, huh, let's maybe pull that in, do that. And I was like, okay, the title actually came first because that I don't titles sometimes are hard, but that one came first. I was like, okay, let's work with that. And then it just kind of evolved from there. I was like, the Highland culture, the Highland landscape, like there's just a lot to work with there.
mm.
So just it was supposed to be a novella, and then I overshot that by 60,000 words. So I was like, well, we're gonna do a novel, I guess. So yeah, I wrote that middle of 2022 and then published in May of 2023. So that was my shortest time writing a novel, which really surprised me because my other book took like 10 years to write. So,
Do you think it's
and then
something
get
to do with
published.
the
Um,
first person narration that comes a little bit more smoothly? Is that why it was a bit faster, do you think?
I think I think so, but then I also do believe that there's times in a writer's life where it's like there's the book that you need yourself and then the book that you needed to tell. So like the main focus is of like mental health and then grieving. It had kind of come at a time where I was dealing with a lot of mental health struggles and a lot of that anxiety. And then also reflecting on like the griefs in my life and then actually losing someone while I was writing that book. So
Mm,
just it was like, okay, this is the book that I need to write, if not for me, but maybe someone else could, use this book. So it was more, all my books are like, these are the books that I want to write because I'm not seeing this.
yeah.
Um, and this just feels like something like I want to write. So this was very much that book of like, I want to do cozier and not as dark as I've written, but kind of still didn't do full cozy. That's why I was calling it cozy dark because I'm like, there's still some heavy themes, there's still a little bit of creepiness, but there's still like that cozy vibe to me that I tried to put into the layers of the book. Um, so yeah, it was the book I needed to write at the time.
I mean, I was saying to you before we started, without getting into specific details, I thought there were elements of the book based on my own personal experiences as well and my family's personal experience that I thought was incredibly well done and handled very deftly. One thing, let me circle back to that. We haven't told the audience, for those who haven't read it and haven't read anything about it, and what the book's about. So, in fact, no, why am I doing it? Kathy, you do it.
Yes, so Hills of Heather and Bone is about a married couple, Marana and Percy. Marana has the gift to hear the bones of the dead, but this magic is kind of forbidden. It's basically like necromancy, but it doesn't bring the person back, it just reanimates the person who's deceased. So for her, like she can hear the voices. This is a power she wants to use, but she can't just because it could get her in serious trouble. So she and her husband have just been constantly on the move, trying to stay ahead of any trouble. And then trouble eventually finds them, so they have to get on the run to try and find someplace safe. So
Yeah.
um, there's a chicken.
I love the
It's
chicken.
The chicken was great. That was definitely an add-on. I was like, we need some sort of animal companion, so let's do a chicken.
You've kind of highlighted in a microcosm all the things I wanted to talk about. Can we talk about Morhenna the chicken for a minute?
Yes,
Because
we
it's not the
can.
most significant part of the book, but everyone seems to talk about it because Morena is terrifying. This chicken that follows the main couple around that is attached
Mhm.
to Percy the husband and does not like Morana, the first person protagonist who we mainly follow. Are there any birds in your life
Yes.
you find deplorable? What's going on there?
So I've kind of also had a healthy fear of chickens, since I was in high school. When I saw one, kind of, it was eating meat, and that kind of freaked me out because I didn't know, like, oh, I didn't think it was supposed to do that. So I was like, well, let's let's stay away from that for now. They taste good, but I don't think I want to be near one. And then Morhenna was kind of inspired by this lady on TikTok and Instagram. She runs this place called the Useless Farm, and she has an emu named Karen, and the emu hates her but loves her husband. So I was like, okay, that's funny, even though it's terrifying. So like, let's pare that down to a chicken, which is still, it's small, but it can still do some damage. So I was like, I already am wary of chickens, so let's just throw that in there as a fun little other thing they have to worry about.
Like,
So,
I remember when I was, how old was I? I must have been 7 or 8. And my father and I were walking along somewhere. Can't remember where, but there was basically two lines of geese on either side of us. And I kind of said to my dad, I'm like, Dad, shall we, do a big circle? And my dad's like, no, my son. And he takes my hand and he goes, I will lead you through these birds. And we get about, they might have been, I can't remember what they were, some large bird. We get about 3 paces in and they just start hissing like this kind of low, sort of ominous, like, "Sss." And I remember
mhm.
we get basically about a third of the way into this whatever you call them, gathering of birds, and my father just looks at me. I remember this so clearly. He just goes, I think it's time to take a few steps back and do what you said. Because
Yep.
they are nasty little beasts sometimes. I mean, they're entertaining, but there is a what's the word? Intimidation factor about them that I think works really well as comic relief in a novel such as yours, especially when so much is happening that is maybe not so comedic.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you
So
about?
that just kind of brought in like,
Sorry, on you.
sorry, go ahead.
No, no,
I was just saying
there's
that was like
well,
just
yeah,
the
there's plenty of
other
this.
like that was just the other element that was like, I wanted cozy-ish kind of farm vibes. And I was like, chickens are that. So yeah, just something that was both a hindrance, but then also like a small comfort for them on their journey. So
Yeah. So the reason what I was going to say is circling back to the previous discussion on trauma. If we're going from trauma to chickens back to trauma. There's a few things I thought you did very deftly. And there's many things I thought you did very deftly, but as I was reading, I thought this is a very difficult line to walk. And I thought without
mhm.
getting into spoilers, you're walking it very well. And the first one is trauma. Because I'm very aware that when you write a character, especially women in fiction, I find this happens to a lot more. You've got to be very careful that the woman, the woman character is not just her trauma. You've got to acknowledge that trauma exists, but at the same time, there has to be more of a character here than just this event, whatever it is that has preceded their start of their story, if you like. And I was wondering if you were conscious of that while you were writing the novel. This is
Mhm.
something that is in your mind as well as you're trying to construct these characters, and especially Morana.
Yeah, no, you said it very well. Because that has been like the line. Because again, as a fantasy reader, like, I've seen a lot of women written by men in
Mm.
books. And so, especially like characters like Morana, they're usually labeled as like, this is all they are. They're just the sad woman. Like, that's their whole trauma. They can't move on from it. This is just all they are. So it was like, I wanted to write a book that acknowledges like loss, grief, mental health struggles with, it is a part of the character, but there's so much else going on. So an exploration of like, how do we not move on from it, but process it in a healthier way that doesn't become like, oh, this is just who this character is. And I had gone through several rounds with beta readers where like, this character is really sad and not doing anything. It's like, well, that is also part of
Mm.
like the emotional journey of moving through those things. There are moments where you're like, I feel just sad all the time and I can't do anything. So, like, knowing that, but then also saying, like, when is it needed and when is it needed for us to move through that with this character. So, I was very cognizant of that, of like, this can't be everything that's happening to this character. But I want it to be a significant part, because that's tied in a lot with her magic and how that impacts her. But then also on the flip side of like, it creates so much more of the healing and growth at the end of the book. As it's like, it's still there, but it's not all consuming.
Yes. And I think that's also connected very well to the second thing that I really loved about this novel, which are the main protagonist. Well, Morana, the first person point of view we get, and her husband Percy. Um, so often in fiction, I think I said this on an Instagram post that there's two routes you can take, right? You can either have the young but new besotted couple that begins either on the page or very recently previous to the page, and they're so young that love is naturally carried forward by how fresh it is. And then on the other hand, you've got certain pieces of fiction. This is, at least has been my experience, where you have couples who've been around for 5, 10 years, however long it is, even longer, and that relationship is just on the page to be broken. And this is
Mhm.
something that I get really fed up with in fiction, where you have 8 times out of 10, let's say, you have a married couple and they're the main focus of the story. And the author essentially goes, how can I split them up or destroy them by the end of the book? And make them
Mhm.
worse, essentially, and have you walking away with a sense of tragedy. And without going into spoilers, I love that your main couple is not that. I wonder if you could tell me maybe about Percy and Moran and what their relationship is and why you constructed it in that way.
Yeah, so two parts of that. I had originally said very early on in my writing career, I will never write a romantasy because just the tropes are, it's not my favorite genre just because it feels, I know when it's well done and I see most of the time it's not well done, at least to me, for like
Mm.
what I'm there for. So I'd seen in like the indie community where they're saying there's not enough like good solid married couples as like a main focus in the book. Zach Argyle does one in his Voice of War trilogy.
Mm.
So I was like, oh, that's the only one I really know of, especially in indie books where like it's not a romantasy, but it's still like them as a couple, and that's important. So I was like, okay, I want to have that for these characters of like how is this going to be tested, because it's like at the end of the day like none of them are going to really make it through it without each other, but also acknowledging like hey, nothing about this is perfect, but you know, how can we still sustain that love through that, um the trials and everything. So it's like I really wanted to write about that, as like not the main focus of the book, but it's still there, which again, the married couple doesn't classify it as romantasy because apparently there's no romance in the marriage, at least according to like the genre itself. So it's like okay, cool. So we've skipped that. We've gotten to like where they are, but then also just because I hadn't seen a lot of books of like how are they sustaining that when they're not, you know, on the brink of splitting apart, but they're on the brink of, you know, just going through life and having to stick together.
Yeah, the Instagram post I'm referencing, I was about 40% through the novel. I said something along the lines of it's much more challenging to write a married couple and have them go through stuff, legitimate stuff, and have them stay true to each other. Um, and I wrote that, and then I thought, hang on, I haven't finished the novel yet. What if I am going to have all the egg on my face having said this? But no, I think again with it, I'm being very conscious of spoilers because I would like people to go out and read it if they haven't heard of it already. But I thought that was pulled off really well done. Like my wife, for example, now my wife is very internet shy. Like she'll never be coming on my channel, which is fine. But I speak about her pretty much every video because I think she's amazing. And one thing she does is this is this side tangent. When I first made this channel, I was a bit self-conscious about it, didn't tell it to anyone apart from her and maybe a couple of other friends. And one day I'm walking into a room and I see my her phone is just sitting on the bedside table, but the volume turned down. And I'm like, what's going on? She's like, well, I'm giving you the watch time. I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, listen, I don't understand what you're talking about, but I will play this video beginning to end to make sure that you have some modicum of support as you're starting this thing. And I think the I mean that's a very light version of one ways couples support each other, but it's not spoken about as much in fiction at all. And so I was personally really glad that this is getting a bit more support. I can't really think of many other couples. I mean, you mentioned one or two, but it's very thin compared to the newly found couple, the will they won't they
Mm-hmm.
couple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because yeah, like you said, like the little things that kind of compound in it. So it's like just taking what I know of like the romance genre and like what makes it good. It's like, well, you can still have those. It's just gonna look different because again, if you've been together for 10 plus years, it's like you know each other, but then it's still also gonna be continual like getting to know each other in the different seasons. So I was like, let's bring that in, just seeing like how we can do this with these characters and make it something that people will actually enjoy, without it
Exactly.
being a little bogged down.
Yeah. The other couple of things I think that you've said that kind of piqued my interest over the course of the conversation. The first thing you've said is this is the idea of the Hills of Heather and being Bone being cozy. And it's interesting because I've heard that from a few people now, a cozy read, but it's not your conventional cozy read at all.
Yeah. So I know like the cozy genre for sure has taken off in the last couple of years, especially with Travis Baldtree's
Mm.
novels and everything. So that form of cozy, I would say, is like very sweet, like very candy sweet. Like it's not a whole lot happening in the background. Like, you know, no one's probably going to die. So it's going to be low stakes, but you know, it's an easy read with a cup of coffee, and you feel good all the way through.
Yeah.
This one, I was like, I still want to have like the vibes of like the garden, the cozy garden, the, you know, the relationship they have, the warm moments. That's what defines cozy for me. But then also, I was finding like the bittersweet can also be really cozy. And I've heard a couple people say that, you know, just like after going through the pain. Yeah, just I wanted it to be like you've gone through the pain and everything, but still wanted it to be like a cozy hug at the end, whether it's a hug of, you know, support or a hug like it's the journey's end kind of cozy. So
Mm.
wanted to play around with that, while still having just a little bit more stakes than what's typically found in a cozy. Eventually, I will write a true cozy, but we're moving out of the dark fantasy kind of genre to do that. So that's what this book was. It was different, kind of bittersweet cozy for me at least. Um, but also, I think I have a very different definition of cozy than some people.
I prefer your
So that's
definition.
why I said cozy dark.
Yeah, I prefer your definition. I think sometimes cozy. I mean, cozy light for light's sake is fine, but I think the idea of braiding it into these other what's the word? Substantial, human. Cozy is human. You know what I'm trying to say? Kind of
Yeah.
having that interspersing is really important. I should say, there's a couple of internet connections, so if we talk over each other, it's not on purpose. Before we came online, we were testing our connections against one another. The other thing you said that I found really interesting, and I really like this personally. You said that you enjoy purple prose. And I thought that's a really interesting thing to say because so often the words purple prose have, negative connotations that this is something that should be avoided at all costs. And I love that in some way you're almost trying to reclaim purple prose, not overwriting, but kind of luscious writing to evoke a certain atmosphere. I wonder how much of that kind of
Hmm.
comes naturally to you, or how much you have to work at as you're doing the draft.
I think a lot of the poetry helped for sure. Again, just like poetry's main focus is how do you get an image and a feeling across with the words that you're using. So this was definitely a test of that, of, you know, throughout all my books, like I love descriptions. I love just creating those pictures. I do know like sometimes like you need to back off and let the reader kind of fill in the thing, but I'm like, let's just put like those descriptions in, especially for like an image that's not quite a common image. Um,
Yeah.
so I just really like descriptions. So just trying to figure out like especially for like different atmospheres, different moments in the book, it's like is this suiting like a calm vibe? Is this like meant to be more of a dark thing? So it's like how do we invoke those different kind of emotions and feelings? So it does take work. Sometimes I'm very early on in my drafts, I'm like, the person walked across the street, or you know, just the basic stuff. Sometimes I'll have like a really good image first in the draft, but then sometimes I really do have to work on it. It's like, okay, what are we trying to convey here? And then obviously when my beta readers come through, they're like, hey, that doesn't make sense, or maybe this is just a little too much, and then trying to, you know, pare it down to like the right consistency for the book in terms of descriptions.
Yeah.
So it takes time, takes a lot of, you know, just working through the sentence to see if it'll work or not, but I enjoy it.
I see you doing that as well, not just now. I've been saying this every interview I've done so far, where I've been reading it on my phone, which I've been despising because I've seen people hold up your book, which is gorgeous inside and out. Because it seems to me it's not just the text that you take a lot of care with and get kind of evoking these images, but actually it's something broader than that. It's on the cover, it's the formatting, it's the images that I believe some of which might even be self-drawn. How much work do you put in once you finish the PDF of text? You then bring about all these other elements to create a what would you call it, an item, as it were.
Mm-hmm. So I love old books. Old books are really pretty to me. It's just something, it's a different time. They're like, we're gonna make this book look really nice.
Mm.
So I always love that. And then because plant magic plays into this kind of book, and I kind of a lot of my mood boards and inspiration for this was like the skull and flowers, like just
Mm.
like, you know, nature exists because something has usually died. So how do those two like play into each other? So I brought a lot of flower imagery in. Most of those ones, pretty much all of them, are from Canva. They're just really nice hand-drawn ones, which took a lot of time to find. The only elements I did myself was like the skull and the heather on the side, like those ones. And
Mm.
I think I don't think I did anything else. So I really wanted to play with like the language of flowers, like the imagery of the flowers, like how does that tie into the chapter themes. So have a lot of those books, just because it's fun and it's, I think it ties really well into like the themes of the book. So I just really wanted a pretty book with what I could do. So really love my cover artist. She did the cover for my dark fantasy novel. And then my special edition, I found, actually, she found me. She had read the book. She's like, I really love this. Do you want to work together? I was like, sure. So had that done for the hardback cover underneath the dust jacket for the hardcover edition. So did really good work on that. But yeah, no, I love pretty books, but I also like affording pretty books. So I was like, let's try to make a book that's a little bit more affordable, unless we get a special edition, like special edition someday.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just was like, even if it's just a basic paperback, I still want it to be nice for whoever's reading it.
Yeah. You're much more skilled with Canva than I am. I use Canva for my thumbnails and it's awful. It's terrible. So
It's a lot of trial and error.
yeah. The other thing is the plant stuff I find really interesting because you mentioned that life and death are kind of core themes here. I mean, the main character is a necromancer. It was bound to be, but you do also have this element of memory. It's almost like a threefold thing when I was reading it that and it's not a spoiler because it's right in the beginning. The main character through someone, and you can correct me if I'm slightly misinterpreting this, that if someone dies in the periphery of the main character, it's not just that she senses their death, it's that their life story gets imprinted onto her, and she has to almost excise this through a writing exercise where she writes their life story down.
Yeah. So that was again kind of playing off a lot of the ideas of like grief, especially like the Western views of grief of like, it's seen more as kind of an inconvenience. It's something to get past rather than to work through. And so the idea of like, all of our loved ones, we carry parts of them with us in some form. So that was what really impacted my decision to create like the powers of the bone weavers of, all the everything that we are is kind of held in the bones. It's not necessarily the spirit, but just like what's left behind is still there. So the bone weavers can kind of draw that out in one form or another. So Morana's particularly like when she's kind of talked with the dead, like her price of, basically kind of talking with them is she has to write things down. Parts of their story. There's other bone weavers in the book later, and they'll have different like kind of prices they have to pay, like cooking like the dead person's like favorite meal just to keep a part of like what's been lost alive. Um, so I really think like in our own griefs of like how do we do that in a way that doesn't become all consuming, but also just acknowledging like, hey, this person's gone, but this is what they've left behind, and for better or for worse, like it's a part of them, and to eventually move through, like it may still be painful, but it also still is a joyful reminder. So that was kind of part of the intention of like her powers of like how can we redefine, because necromancy usually gets like a bad rap. It's like
Mm.
it's evil, it's brought up like the dead are being used for this. It's like this is just a part of like her powers that she can't help, but how she uses it is very different than like what people in this culture see it as. So it's more of a way of helping those who are grieving and working through her own grief, to be a form of healing in a sense.
It's I mean, when someone close to us passes away and the tears happen and the initial shock is over and we get to that kind of wake stage of the funeral, what's the first thing people do? We start to gather around and tell stories about the person. And it's hardly ever the stories where they come out like a shining hero. It's the stories where they come off as,
Mm-hmm.
they left the pie in the oven and burnt the kitchen down or, something like that. Um, I think you're right that the concept of death as something that creates genuine sorrow, but at the same time allows us to reflect both on ourselves and the people around us. What's the word for that? I guess rewarding, maybe, or
Rewarding might be a good I don't know. It's there's a because people will define it in different ways.
Yeah.
Cathartic is almost the word.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think rewarding might be the better one for right now that I can
It's
think
hard,
of.
isn't it? Because you don't want to ever, praise and raise up the fact that someone has passed away, but there is,
Yeah,
it's hard to articulate the words. And I'm scared of
yeah,
saying the wrong word and making it sound very facile and trite because it's still something deeply impactful in a negative way. But
hmm
the positive joy of being able to reflect and recapture someone's life is a
hmm
genuine part of grieving. Um,
Oh yeah.
it's a fantastic book. It really is. Just before you came on, I had 10 minutes to kill. I was looking up Philip Chase's review. And it was Philip who put me onto your work, actually. And the first thing
Yeah.
he said, I don't know if you've seen his review of Hills of Heather and Bone. I'm sure you have.
hmm
The first thing he says was, I've got it written down here. When I started SPFBO, or when he became a judge, this was exactly the kind of book I was hoping to read. Which that was a lovely quote. I mean, that's what you want to hear when you open up a review of your work, isn't it?
Yeah, no, and that whole thing again, like I had for this book, I was like, ah, maybe I'll enter it into SPFBO. I don't know what will happen. And then it was like the last day of like the finalist judging because I'd done SPFBO 8 and made it to semifinalist, and I was like right up against one other person for finalist, didn't make finalist then. So I was like, well, try this book because this is the only other book I have. And
Can I
then
stop
to
you for a minute, Katie? Sorry to
yeah,
interrupt. That one was on purpose. Because I'm aware that many people, I think the SPFBO community
oh yes,
knows SPFBO really, really well, but I'm also aware that there's maybe some people maybe one step back from indie stuff and BookTube might be hearing this acronym and maybe they've heard it at one point. But could you just very quickly articulate what it is and your process entering it?
yeah, so SPFBO is the self-published fantasy blog off started by Mark Lawrence. So he doesn't really run it, but he has coordinated it and given basically 300 indie authors each year a chance to just have their books read and hopefully win finalists. So I had entered it because I'd been a big Mark Lawrence fan. He was one of my first like dark fantasy writers, and I was like, oh, I really love morally great characters. This is fun.
His trilogy,
Um,
his first trilogy is wonderful. Yeah.
Yep. I need to reread it and then read his other stuff.
Mm.
So yeah, he created this thing. I don't remember how I really knew about it besides I think just like following his work and he had mentioned it. And then once I had started publishing, I was like, oh, I guess I can enter this.
Yeah.
And then that's how I met the wonderful indie book community, just being invited to the SPFBO Discord. And just everything else is history. So entering this book, I was like, okay, we're gonna finish it in time for SPFBO. Hopefully we'll get in because there before it was you'd have to wake up whenever it opened and it could be whatever hour of the day.
Mm.
The first time it took like 3 hours to fill, and then 2023 it took 45 minutes. So I was like, well, maybe we made it in. We don't know. Um, and I looked at everyone in my category. I was like, man, these are some really good books.
Mm.
I looked out with my judge. I've been so thankful the last couple of years just having kind of the right judge because I was like, well, if this book ended up in someone else's hands, I don't
Yeah.
think they would like it. So yeah, and then being chosen as finalist was a surprise because I was going in for surgery like the day it was announced, like, oh, the final finalists. And so they're like, oh yeah, like that week, they're like, oh, you're a semifinalist. I'm like, yay, awesome. So I made the graphic and everything. And I was like, well, I got surgery at the end of the week. We'll
Mm.
see if, you know, we've made it to finalists or not, because they had to be picked by our, November 1st. And so I was like, the day of my surgery, someone was like, hey, congrats on being finalist. I'm like, okay, did I die? Like, what has happened? Like, it was very surreal because I hadn't eaten in 24 hours for the surgery. And they're like, yeah, no, you're finalist. I'm like, what has happened? Because there hadn't been a whole lot of cozies that had made it through. Romance had started to kind of make waves into the finalists, but primarily it was more like dark, straight fantasy.
Yes.
So it was just a great group of finalists getting all together. And so, yeah, seeing like which judges kind of like really connected with the piece was really exciting. Also very nerve wracking. So that
Mm.
was the part I was like, if I could do it differently, I just would never at Eddie until after. And then I came in second by like 0.05. So it was just like there was one review. Yeah. So it was good though because the book that won, I really liked that book. And really it's hard because when you're in a group of 10 people for several months, you're just like, I want you to win. I want to win, but I want you to win. And we can't all win.
There's
So
a
we
real
did joke
friendliness
about
to the
that.
community, isn't there?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
on the interviews we would go on, they always joke, they're like, all you guys talk about is food. I'm like, that's most of our chat is just we have a food chat and then we'll talk about our reviews and maybe some other stuff. But it's like it's mostly food because that's just what brings us together. But yeah, it was a great group of people.
Yeah.
Loved all of their books. So yeah, it was a really good experience, and I think that really helped the book kind of get to where it is. So I was very thankful for that. And then obviously Philip Chase, where he's like, "Oh, I cried reading this book." I'm like, "I'm so
Yeah.
sorry," but that's also what it's supposed to do. So yeah, just seeing like who's kind of connected with the book of like, oh, I wouldn't expect that person to like pick that book up or really connect with this book
Mhm.
has been a joy and a surprise. So just again, like the magic of books is there's always someone out there who will read it and connect with it, even
There's a
though it may not make sense.
Yeah. I mean, certainly I did. But there's a numerical element to SPFBO, right? You wake up to numbers being graded in front of hundreds of people.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Me, I couldn't do that. No, absolutely
It
terrifying.
that's what the Discord is for. Is like you're all in it together. You're like, this sucks, but also congrats. But oh man, that sucks. Like I remember when I got my worst review on it, which was like 5. I was like, can it get lower than a 5? Like what do we do with this so that all there to support, but then also being like, it's not for everyone. That's fine. But
Like I
yeah, it's a
remember, like,
lot.
I remember at university getting a grade, and the person next to you going, "What did you get?" And I'm like, "Don't worry about it." Do you know what I mean? Like to like get
hmm
literal anxiety thinking about the fact of waking up to a score. But I mean, obviously for you, it panned out
hmm
extremely well. You said 2 out of 300
Um,
finalists.
so so it's 300. They narrow it down to the semifinalists, and then 10 finalists are chosen.
Okay,
So whittled it down out of 300, and then out of our 10 group, I came in second out of
well,
that.
well deserved. Well deserved.
Yeah.
I know our time is short. We're already past our hour. There's one more thing I want to talk to you about, which is that you and I have something in common besides Scotland, which is that we
Hmm.
worked in writing centres in university. Um, and I've heard you speak about this once, and the fact that it helps you kind of get your own grammar together. But I don't know if you have any kind of memories or anything funny or anecdotal happened to you during your time at the writing centre, because for me at least, it was a real source of oddballs showing up at the last minute, hoping for a miracle.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah.
I think it was my junior year, my third year of college. And I was like, okay, I want to do this. I want to work on campus. I want to actually do something in my English degree. So I joined real wonderful group of people. I remember some of them from like my year going on. So we had the writing assistants, and then we had the teachers assistants, then we had the grad students.
Mhm.
Um, so a real mix of everyone kind of doing everything. Um, Definitely, going through all the basics like how do we do ADP or AP and how do we do Chicago, MLA, what's changed, all the fun things. Um, the one the one student who was really memorable to me, he really struggled with his papers. Like I was like, I don't know how to tell you this, but I think you might need to restart the whole thing.
Yeah.
So like I'm always optimistic, like, hey, here's the good parts, here's what we're doing, but hey, this is like not the best stuff. Had worked with him for a couple of sessions, and then I hadn't seen him for a couple of months, and then I was leaving like the restroom at one of the buildings, and he was like standing out there, and I was like, that's weird. He's like, hey, I worked on my papers, but now my teacher is accusing me of plagiarism. I was like, I don't know what to do with that. Like, did you plagiarize or did you improve? Like,
Yeah.
what's happening? But that was also writing center was where I learned D&D for the first time, Dungeons and Dragons, and they were starting like a writers group of Dungeons and Dragons, but also like how to teach people how to like do creative stuff, like how do you write a character, how do you write a story. So my first time playing Dungeons and Dragons, I lasted 2 sessions and then I died by falling down some stairs. So I learned never run downstairs. I died and then I was eaten by locusts. So that ended up being when I graduated, like my superlative award. They're like most likely to die by falling downstairs in Dungeons and Dragons, and that was what the whole writing center had agreed on. So I had an award for that. Um, yeah, it was a really great group of people. Just that's how I met my writers group. Like they are all writing center students. Some of them have gone back and now like head up different departments at the writing centers.
Yeah.
So yeah, a really good group. And one of the girls, she's getting her book traditionally published with Titan Books in
Amazing.
July. So yeah.
Amazing. For me, writing center, I mean, I'm sure I helped some people along the way, but as you kind of said, it was more for me in retrospect. I was getting paid to get an education in spelling, punctuation, and grammar. logical cohesion in an argument, and also the creative element that you spoke about with Dungeons and Dragons. Um, yeah, I really valued my time, but the number of people who would show up 12 hours before a deadline or 2 hours before a deadline saying, "Can you fix this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, can you build me a building?" Do you know what I mean? It's too late, mate. I'm going to have that
Yeah,
quiet.
and they're like, "How do I write this paper?" I'm like, "Okay, what's the rubric?" They're like, "What rubric?" I'm like,
Yeah,
"Well, okay, there's our problem.
yeah.
Um,
Where are the
don't know how to help
paragraphs?
you there." Where's the paragraph? Yeah, the nursing students' papers were always the fun ones because it's like there's a lot of big words in there, and I'm trying to figure out what that word is and if it makes sense in this sentence. So we had some math majors come in too. Those were always the fun ones because no offense to the math majors, but writing was not there, not on the front of their mind,
Yeah.
and it showed.
My
But
brother,
yeah, it was.
sorry, my brother's an engineer and he is 20 IQ points more intelligent than me. And he just capitalizes whatever he likes. If it sounds resonant in an essay, he would just do it. Like I said, why are you doing that? He's like, well, it looks important, looks significant. So yeah, I think a lot of us who maybe are used to kind of literature and books tend to take some of this stuff for granted. And
Oh yeah,
it's a good exercise in working out as well what the major kind of targets and shifts are that you need to kind of propel. And for me as a teacher as well, it helps me to work out, right, okay, so this is what people struggle with, generally speaking, and that's maybe what I should be zooming in on before yeah, I really enjoyed my time in the writing center, and I heard you speak about it. I thought that's something to pick your brain over.
yeah,
Yeah. Now, like, I think,
definitely good couple of years.
yeah. Absolutely. Now, two questions for you before the internet fails us completely. First of all, what writing do you
Mhm.
have coming up? What are you working on? And then where can we find you as well?
Yeah. So I am working on the second book of my dark fantasy trilogy.
Hmm.
I'm hoping to get it out by the end of the year. It's half edited, half in revision stage. So that is The Women of Steel and Scars. And then I'm also kind of working on a short poetry collection again because it's been a while since I've done one. And then I have some short stories. They're actual cozy fantasy. So I'm hoping to maybe drop those periodically, maybe this year, maybe next year. So that's pretty much it what I'm working on.
Mhm.
Um, and then I can be found Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Twitter, usually K.E Andrews or K.E Andrews author. Books, most of them should be available pretty much everywhere. Hills of Heather and Bone is going to be wide soon, so you'll be able to find it in like different ebook formats other than Kindle.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so that's pretty much it.
I think I already told you, I've purchased Hills of Heather and Bone in the physical. I can't do the digital. I'm going to get that nice copy with all the stuff on it. So listen, thank you
Mhm.
so much for your time. Thanks for bearing with me. We've been saying before we started again, our internet is we're about 3 seconds behind each other, but I think we've coped quite well, to be honest.
I think so.
Yeah, it's been okay. Thank you all for watching. And if you have any author, self-pub, or indie recommendations that you would like me to read, or people maybe that I could reach out and chat to, guys, please let me know. And in the meantime, I'll see you on the next one. Thanks very much. Goodbye.